A very warm welcome to all of you to the conference, which will be devoted to the performance of the companies of the Grupa Azoty Group after the first quarter of 2018. Welcome to all of you present in the room, and welcome to all our webcast viewers who are watching and listening to us live. Today's speakers include Wojciech Bardacki, PhD, President of the Management Board of Grupa Azoty S.A., as well as President of the Management Board of Grupa Azoty Police, Mr. Paweł Łapiński, Vice President of the Management Board of Grupa Azoty S.A., Mrs. Izabela Świderek, PhD, Vice President of the Board of Grupa Azoty Puławy, Mr. Artur Kamiński, Vice President of the Board of Grupa Azoty Kędzierzyn. We do hope that Mr. Włodzimierz Zasadzki, Vice President of the Board of Grupa Azoty Police, will also join us shortly. I will now give the floor over to the President of the Management Board of Grupa Azoty S.A. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting devoted to our results for the FY 2017, and also, during that presentation, we referred to certain events which took place in the first quarter of 2018, which will be discussed in more detail in terms of our performance today. I do not want to go too much into the details at that point, because 2 weeks ago we did discuss that issue, but I would like to recapitulate on the major events of Q1. Our work devoted to consolidation and integration across the group were continued in Q1, in particular in agro-fertilizers. As our major segment, in February, 4 major companies signed a cooperation agreement which specified integration of sales in the agro-fertilizer segment, followed by decisions taken by individual companies, and the corporate department has been established and is part of the organizational structure of all 4 major companies of the group, and is headquartered at Puławy. It is to launch its operations shortly. The staffing is in progress, but what is the most important is that in Q1 we had a meeting before the presentation of our annual results with distributors, during which the new department, which will coordinate the entire sales across the group, put forward new proposals to the distributors in terms of new relations with distributors, adjusted to the ever-evolving market conditions so as to prevent certain problems and unfair competition, which unfortunately is still evident in the market, so that we have certain tools to make it possible for us to flexibly react to certain market problems. In Q1, we also have continued our operations in terms of our projects, in terms of startups and innovations in research and development. This has also been discussed recently. I will not like to go too much into details here, because we did discuss those matters during our annual presentation, annual conference devoted to 2017. In Q1, we had certain events which were beyond our control, which, however, did affect our operations and also our performance. Q1 was a period which saw, especially in March and April, in February and March, which saw major fluctuations in gas prices, with the differences between maximum and minimum prices of as much as 300%. There was a wave of cold weather in Western Europe as well, which added insult to injury, and also problems with gas production in Norway. As a result, prices shot up, and mandatory stocks in Western Europe went down, resulting in a major increase in prices of as much as 300%, which did affect certain fertilizer products. In certain fertilizer products, the share of gas prices represents as much as 80%. On average, it represents 50%. which is only natural. And it is only natural that such fluctuations in gas prices did affect not only our company, but also our European competitors. Of course, we are not talking about Russian competitors, because in their case, the Russian companies' case, gas prices are subject to a different regime. We did react flexibly, bringing down or cutting down certain productions of certain products in which gas prices represent a high share of the overall product price. We did react flexibly so as not to generate additional unnecessary costs and negative results. Both gas and in terms of gas, we also have a contract with PGNiG, Polish gas and oil company, which refers to market parameters in European prices, which are the same parameters that are applied by our European competitors. We are analyzing the situation. We are always on the outlook in terms of gas prices, so as to make sure that we have the most optimum flexible solution and agreement, and also to modify this agreement, certain provisions of this agreement, if necessary. As a side note, PGNiG reported very good results, exceptionally good results, and their main client is Grupa Azoty, which means that the reserves and the stocks that our main business partner has, without even reference to the indexes or parameters included in the agreement, meet our expectations as the major client, the most important client of PGNiG. In this difficult market reality, we are sure that our needs and interests will be taken into account by PGNiG. Quarter one is also a period of unstable weather. After the frosts, the ground was frozen, which in March prevented farmers from using liquid fertilizers. Many grounds, many portions of land were clearly frozen, especially when you flew over the land, that you could see it clearly from the plane, looking down. And this was followed by a period of thawing, and farm work started, and only then our sales went up. This year we had a cumulation or a cumulative effect of high stocks in the warehouses of our distributors. Some companies started much earlier than Grupa Azoty in terms of the stocks. These were all the elements that distinguish quarter one in comparison with previous years. In terms of our macro situation, the macro situation which was beyond our control, it shows the significance and the importance of diversification of revenues, which we consistently implement across the group. Because due to diversification, thanks to diversification, we were able to make our performance contingent mostly on not only on agrofertilizers but also chemicals, not only in terms of titanium white but also oxo fertilizers. If you look at sulfur prices, if you look at Siarkopol and the measures that we took in Siarkopol, this also had a positive effect on that segment. The financial performance, which we did manage to have in that very unfavorable period, is very positive, because it needs to be referred to previous years. The consolidated revenue in quarter one reached almost 2.5 billion PLN. Consolidated EBITDA came in at 403 million. Consolidated net profit reached nearly 190 million, 188 million to be exact, and all the measures that we have taken, despite lower revenue and lower EBITDA, which followed downward trends, we were able to keep up the pace in terms of our EBITDA margin, which came in at 16.1% versus 16.9% year on year. I would like to also mention at this point about yesterday's decision of the management board. We decided to recommend the payment of dividend for 2017 at 1.25 PLN per share, which is the highest, historically highest dividend since 2013. That is since the year as of which the organization of our group is based on 4 major companies. Looking at our profitability versus our share prices quoted yesterday, or looking at the average of the chemical market, our profitability was, in our opinion, very good in the face of those challenging conditions. If we look at a comparison, and at that point I would like to refer back to the diversification efforts and the change in revamping of our structure of revenues, we compared our revenue and EBITDA and net profit generated in years 2007, 2017, and also we are presenting a forecast for 2023 on this particular slide. It becomes evident that the group, or Grupa Azoty Tarnów, had a absolutely different scale of revenue. In 2007, revenue came in at 1.3 billion PLN, EBITDA came in at 163, versus 2017, in which we reported revenue at 9.6 billion PLN and EBITDA at 1.1 billion PLN. In terms of the forecasts, I would like to emphasize that those forecasts do not include potential acquisitions. In terms of the forecast for 2023, we are expecting our revenue to reach 15 billion PLN. In terms of the particular structure of our segment performance, in 2017, we had a breakdown between fertilizers, agro-fertilizers and chemicals. In 2017, we had a breakdown into plastics, agro-fertilizers and chemicals, and plastics represented nearly 15%. And in 2023, we want the share of agro-fertilizers to be much lower than 50%, which will allow us to react flexibly to ever-changing economic cycles and to change our product structure, moving towards more advanced products, highly processed products, and we want to increase and improve our margins and profitability so as not to be exposed to certain macro risks which are beyond our control. I'll now give the floor over to Mr. Paweł Łapiński, Vice President of the Management Board of Grupa Azoty S.A., to discuss those results in more detail. Thank you very much. Mr. Bardacki mentioned certain figures. I would like to go back to the question of margins, and I would like to emphasize that our EBITDA margin came in at more than 16%, with revenue falling down at around 7%, which is a little bit higher than the market analysts' consensus, which came in, as far as I remember, at 362 million PLN. In addition to the standard information, I would like to also discuss certain additional information in terms of investments made by the group, which is to meet your expectations. And also I'll discuss our relations, the relations of our performance versus the prices of wheat. Moving on to the more detailed information, in terms of our segments, we had two factors which had a positive influence on our segment. First of all, gas prices and energy. We are selling both gas and energy to our local clients, business partners. Therefore, we reported a positive performance at 23 million PLN. And also the chemical segment. We distributed part of our nitrogen products in the form of technical grade urea and products such as AdBlue. These were the positive factors. On the other hand, we did have negative factors which affected our performance, namely the agro-fertilizer segment and, to a certain extent, to a minimum extent, also the plastics segment. In terms of the specific structure after Q1, we had a breakdown into segments presented on the next slide, which is in line in our direction and our assumptions. Now, the main culprit of what has happened in Q1 is obviously the weather. We had two major heat of cold weather in March, during which temperature fell to even minus 20% degrees Celsius. The second wave of cold weather was not that bad. However, the price of gas did shoot up considerably. This is a situation we have not seen for many years. And secondly, the application of fertilizers in March, the major part of this month, was impossible, and the use of fertilizers was only possible in the last week of March and also in April. Those two factors, which were due to bad weather conditions, adverse weather conditions, did affect the performance of our agro-fertilizer segment. It is also clearly visible here that we had differences in terms of the trends for prices and costs. On the left-hand side, you see a chart which presents the level of gas prices, which is much higher year on year. But if we look at the following slides, the price of gas fell in subsequent months. This is the specificity of Europe and Europe's weather. The weather in Europe was cold. We had a cold wave. However, the prices of gas also depend on more global trends. The prices of energy, electricity, and coal, especially coal, which is much higher than last year, and also heat, which is the main cost driver in the chemicals segment, chemicals production, were also important and presented an additional factor affecting our performance. You can see the benchmark prices which are falling down, but the direction of gas prices or the trends for gas prices are quite opposite. As a result, it did affect our price of products. And we do expect that the market will see a surplus in terms of the quantity of certain products, which obviously will be visible in the months to come. The situation that we have right now, which is lower sales, I'll discuss this in a moment, also affected our competitors. So this problem affects all European producers without exceptions. On the next slide, you can see I'm sorry, I need a moment here to move to this particular slide. In general, we reported an 18% decline in revenue, falling by 18%. And our overall performance was affected also by higher costs. As you can see, the volumes went down considerably, especially in terms of fertilizers, compound fertilizers, to be more specific, and also for other fertilizers, which reported a double-digit decline. Some of the volumes here in terms of products sales will be moved to Q2, and our overall balance for the first half of the year will look much different. However, we are talking about an overall decline in terms of fertilizers volumes, sales by volume of 15%. Looking at the chemical segment, the situation here is much more stable. As I have mentioned before, we sold certain part of our fertilizers. Both NOxes and urea, technical grade urea, reported good results in spite of certain problems in other product groups. For instance, melamine, which reported good sales but was also affected by gas prices. As for titanium white, it rides well. We are expecting at the end of the year, we will relaunch certain production capacities. And as a result, in terms of our EBITDA for that segment, it went up 20 million, and also sales went up. This also applies to our benchmark prices, which reported growing trends. In terms of plastics, the situation in the plastics segment is still stable, with prices moving on in the direction that was expected. However, you might ask why our performance in the plastics segment is lower year-on-year compared to Q1 2017. First of all, let me start with caprolactam. We reduced the sales of caprolactam by 11,000 tons, which represents 63%, which was in line with our earlier plans, the shift towards polyamide. As a result, the production of polyamide went up by 11%. Why did we reduce the sales of caprolactam? First of all, we wanted to have a deeper processing and to report better performance at the level of polyamide. Second of all, we need to remember about the prices in Asia and also the prices, the exchange rates of US dollar. Our sales to Asia lost its momentum in terms of our margins. And the differences between US dollar and PLN exchange rates represented a decline of 20%. And as a result, the revenue from Asia is much lower than a year ago. Luckily, we did manage to move certain volumes to polyamide, which is sold to Western Europe and is usually settled at euro in the European currency. If it hadn't been for that decision, then probably the problematic situation in Asia, we would probably report a lower performance. We did increase our production capacity significantly. Our production capacity, new capacities after Q1, is at 75%, which is much higher than we had expected before. And one more piece of information, which is important for you: when we launch new plants, new installations, we usually generate or produce a product which is of non-standard quality, second-degree quality, so to speak, and we did sell those products at a little lower prices and lower margins. This also affected our performance in Q1. All in all, if the capacity utilization remains at the same level, the situation throughout the year should be good. We are also selling new volumes on the market, which is always related to lower margins. We try not to cannibalize, so to speak, the European market. We try not to undermine the European market. Therefore, our targets are usually outside of Europe. We also launched the sales of polyamides to the United States of America, and this is where we want to gain new markets. And with time, our margins should improve and increase. A couple of words about our investments. You might remember, you probably do remember about our investment program, 7 billion in investments up to, until 2020. Starting from 2014, we spent so far 4 billion PLN, which means that for the 3 years to come, we'll still theoretically have 3 billion PLN to spend to meet our promises. We know that we will spend more. Our investment program, our CapEx program, is still growing, and it reaches even outside 2020. In terms of our investments in 2018, I would like to draw attention to the fact that a major part of our investment outlays will be focused on growth CapEx, and a great share will be also directed to Grupa Azoty Puławy. On the next slide, you will see that information, which is in more detail. We're talking about the granulated fertilizers plant at Puławy, investments related to nitric acid at Puławy as well, and also the esters plant. We had a whole list of investments, several dozen investment projects, which all make up the amount of our investment spending that I have mentioned. In terms of our financial standing, you can see that our ratios are at very safe levels. Net debt to EBITDA at 0.53, net debt at 604 million PLN. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will now give the floor over to Mrs. Izabela Świderek, Vice President of the Board of Grupa Azoty Puławy. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to recap in terms of our performance at Grupa Azoty Puławy and the Grupa Azoty Puławy Group in 2018 first quarter. Of course, all the market trends that have been discussed by my colleagues did affect our situation and our performance at Puławy in Q1 this year. Our revenue at 910 million PLN is lower compared to the previous year, year-on-year. And the situation on the agricultural market and also import volumes affected our performance in terms of our revenue. Our revenue went down slightly. If we analyze our revenue structure and the decline in our revenue versus our sales, you can see that sales in Poland went down by 6% or 36 million PLN, and our sales outside of Poland went down by 57 million PLN, which represents nearly 16%. Those results affected our EBITDA and the EBITDA margin, which was also influenced by an increase in costs, mainly due to the increase in costs of our main strategic ingredients, main strategic raw materials. The price of gas in Q1 is nearly 10% higher in comparison with the corresponding period last year. And if we add an increase of 5% in the prices of electricity and the increase in the price of coal by 6%, then obviously obviously, those were the factors which had to affect our performance. The only case in which the situation was reversed was the price of benzene, which went down by more than 13% year on year. In Q1, we did not see at Grupa Azoty Puławy any one-off events, and we did not have any one-off write-offs in terms of our assets. If we analyze our EBITDA in reference to last year, you can see that our EBITDA went down by 45 million PLN. And if we analyze the situation by segment, you will see that the agro segment had a negative impact on our EBITDA, representing nearly 37 million PLN. Therefore, lower revenue combined with higher prices of production at Grupa Azoty Puławy resulted in the overall performance of that particular segment. A similar situation was observed in the chemicals segment, which had a negative effect of minus 23 million PLN on our overall EBITDA, despite the fact that we did sell higher volumes of our products than we had expected before, mainly in the case of caprolactam, whose price was lower than expected. Caprolactam itself resulted in a negative impact of the chemicals segment, going down by 23 million PLN, as I said. However, we did have a positive contribution from the energy segment. As Mr. Łapiński previously mentioned, we did sell our electricity to external customers, and the prices of electricity had a positive contribution to our EBITDA in Q1. In terms of the structure of our revenue, then despite the structure looks almost identical to a number of previous corresponding periods, then it must be, however, noticed that our revenue in the agro segment is falling at the expense of the revenue of other segments. In Q1, the revenue generated in the agro segment fell down by 4 percentage points, whereas the contribution of the chemicals segment went up. Moving on, the increase of nearly 69% in the energy segment also had a good contribution, positive contribution in our overall performance. In Q1, the overall sales were focusing on the Polish markets, which represented more than 69%, and the rest, which is more than 30%, was sold in foreign markets. The fertilizers segment, as I have mentioned before, had a negative contribution to our EBITDA, generating revenues at lower levels versus our revenues in the corresponding period last year. I would not like to repeat what factors contributed to that situation. I would like to add that we had a decline of 63 million PLN for nitrogen fertilizers. which is due to the fact that they were negative price trends outside of Poland. So we sold lower volumes of products at lower prices. In terms of phosphate fertilizers and compound fertilizers, considering their share in the overall performance of our agro fertilizer segment, they generated sales lower by 15% year on year. And the prices also reflected international trends. Most of our products were sold at prices which were lower on average by 6% for NPK products up to 1.5% for other products. EBITDA of our agro fertilizers segment went down by 37 million year on year, and most of our shares were focusing on the Polish market, representing more than 72%. Moving on to the chemicals segment, which also had a negative contribution to our EBITDA. The revenue in the chemicals segment went down by 11 million PLN, which is due mainly to the lower prices of our products, especially in terms of caprolactam, which reported a decline by 21 million PLN. But we also had other negative factors, for instance, a decline in the prices of benzene, which affected the prices of caprolactam, and also a change in the exchange rate of US dollar. The main products of the chemical segment, which is melamine, reported higher sales by 13 million PLN, which was an effect of the international trends in the caprolactam market. And the average increase in price in the price of caprolactam represented 12%. And as my colleagues have already mentioned, we need to remember about the international trends of caprolactam prices going down due to the changes in prices of benzene, which also had an effect on our performance. In general, our EBITDA in the chemical segment went down year on year. And in terms of the geographical structure of our sales, we usually sell caprolactam to on international markets. In terms of our financial position and financial ratios, we are on the safe side. Our ratios are stable, especially in terms of the liquidity ratio, which went down only slightly on the back of our investment projects, which are in progress. Our debt levels are very safe, which is represented by the positive ratios presented on the slide. Our investment outlays made in Q1 exceeded 75 million PLN, 75.5 million PLN, and most of these outlays are related to the main strategic investments, which is the upgrade of the nitric acid plant, where we spent more than 9 million PLN, and also the plant in which we produce granulated fertilizers, on which we spent 3 million PLN. And the third major investment is the replacement of the energy production units. These are only several investment projects, because most of them are also replacement projects, replacement capex aimed at improving the working conditions of our employees and the quality of our products. All in all, we spent more than 75 million PLN on our investment projects in Q1. Mr. Włodzimierz Zasadzki will now discuss the performance at Grupa Azoty Police. At Police, we need to first of all take a general look at our performance, which was, generally speaking, positive. First of all, we had substantially lower performance in the fertilizer segment, both in terms of EBITDA, revenue, and net profit, which was obviously due to the market conditions, the difficult market situation, a major increase in gas prices, and also a decline in the prices of ammonia. However, this situation was, to a large extent, offset by a good trends in the pigments segment, where we reported higher revenues year-on-year by 1 quarter, 25%. And also, in terms of EBITDA, we did report higher results for pigments. Obviously, our performance needs to be analyzed against a bigger picture of the market. In comparison with our peers. So if we refer our performance to the market, then despite the fact that Yara reported a significant increase in sales, it also reported a significant decline in their net profit, which means that their performance here was much worse than ours at Grupa Azoty Police. The same applies to our petrochemical products. If we, moving on to the fertilizer segment, our revenue was much lower year-on-year, going down by nearly 20%, 18% to be more specific, mainly due to lower sales of compound fertilizers, which went down by 25%, urea going down by 14%, ammonia going down by 13%. All in all, our EBITDA went down by nearly 42% in this particular area. Our performance in the fertilizer segment is mainly due to the difficult market conditions, especially by higher gas prices, which in March reported a threefold increase, and also a decline in the prices of ammonia, which is shown in this particular chart, showing a spread between those figures. To add insult to injury again, we need to remember about the very challenging weather, which had a major impact on our results in terms of the sales of compound fertilizers. On the one hand, the demand for gas resulted in a major increase in the gas prices. But on the other hand, it resulted in the fact that farmers were not able to apply used fertilizers. Therefore, we had two problems. First of all, the weather, which resulted in higher gas prices. And secondly, a major delay in the application of fertilizers by farmers, especially of compound fertilizers, because these fertilizers were usually more popular. At Police, our overall performance was improved by good sales of titanium white. And the revenue in terms of titanium white went up by nearly 25% year on year. And EBITDA went up by nearly 75%. In terms of our financial strength, those ratios, especially the profitability ratio, were affected by the market situation. They went down, however, they did go down only slightly year on year. But the EBITDA or EBIT went up by 2%, with EBITDA going down by 1%. Our liquidity ratios remained more or less flat year on year. And the same applies to our debt ratios. Thank you very much for your attention. I would like to add one thing at this point. We are talking about the situation in ammonia. At Police, on the one hand, we sell ammonia to Tarnów. Internally, these are our internal sales, but we also sell our products to foreign markets, which is due to the favorable location of Police. And with the price of gas going up so significantly, it did affect our performance in this particular area. We had to postpone our maintenance shutdowns, and also it did affect our situation and our performance in the fertilizers. However, if we refer to our situation and our profitability since 2013, as shown on this particular slide, then if we look at our revenue, we will see that our revenue went down in 2015, but the EBITDA margin stood at a very good level. And the same applies to net profit, which in 2015 went up versus 2013 or 14. We did take a number of measures to cut down on our overheads and other costs. We also modernized and upgraded our installations, our plants. In previous years, we did not have proper maintenance procedures. For instance, it applies to pigments, where upgrades are necessary and were necessary, and we did take those efforts in order to modernize those installations. We also want to upgrade the entire chain of production in other products. I would like to add at this point that if we analyze the performance of our peers, for instance, Yara, then despite Yara reported higher revenues, it did report a decline of more than 40% in terms of their net profit. This is very important. If we are talking about ammonia at Grupa Azoty, then we needed to optimize our costs. We needed to cut down on our costs. And at Police, we did take a lot of effort to optimize our cost structure. We'll probably have a number of questions from you later on during the Q&A session. and after the conference. And also you probably will ask about our African operations as well. But in terms of phosphates, we did sign a number of agreements for phosphates supplies and low cadmium phosphates in particular, which will be used for the production of products of certain parameters to be sold in specific markets. Moving on, we will now give the floor over to Mr. Artur Kamiński, who will discuss the performance of Grupa Azoty Kędzierzyn. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I would like to discuss the performance and financial standing at Grupa Azoty Kędzierzyn in the first quarter of 2018. And with all responsibility, I would like to state at this point that our situation was pretty much stable and pretty much satisfactory, especially in the face of a number of events and problems which were beyond our control. These were discussed before. In terms of our main parameters, our revenue and EBITDA and also net profit is presented on this particular slide that I am showing right now. We are very proud to say that in quarter 1, 2018, we reported higher revenue, going up by 12 million PLN year on year. I will discuss it in more detail later on, but this increase was mainly on the back of good performance in the sales of OXO alcohols, which offset other sales. Despite the fact that our revenue went up year on year, we did report a slight decrease in EBITDA and also net profit. The situation is still stable. We're still on the safe side. This decrease and declines are slight. However, we have to remember that these were due to higher costs and especially higher costs of my main strategic feedstocks. Obviously, we're talking about gas, natural gas, for which average prices in quarter 1 went up by 10%, almost 10% year on year, which represents the amount of around 10 million PLN at our company. This is the reason why our revenue went down. Our performance went down in general. The next slide presents a structure of revenue at Grupa Azoty Kędzierzyn in quarter 1, 2018. The strength of Grupa Azoty Kędzierzyn is the model structure of diversification of revenue sources. One segment tries to outdo another, so to speak, at Grupa Azoty Kędzierzyn, and especially at OXO alcohols at 40%, and the fertilizers segment represents 30+%. If one of our segments faced a difficult, challenging conditions, then the other one would make up for it. And it did happen in quarter 1. The revenue, the performance at fertilizers segment went down, but the situation, this decline, was offset by the other segment. The decline was due mainly to lower sales of fertilizers, especially due to adverse weather conditions and delayed application of fertilizer products by farmers. However, in terms of our revenue generated by OXO alcohol segment, it went up by 14%, and taking into account that this segment was stronger than the fertilizer segment, it did offset the negative trends in the fertilizers segment. The 14% increase were due to, first of all, higher prices of products and also higher volumes of products sold, and the market was more receptive of our products with a good relation between supply and demand. And also we did have higher propylene prices, and need to remember that propylene is one of the major feedstocks used in the production of oxo alcohols. Taking account the price index and the indices, we know that the prices of propylene do affect the prices of oxo alcohols or have a positive effect on them. Moving on to the next slide, which discusses our financial performance in more detail with a breakdown into the two major segments, oxo and fertilizers. In fertilizers, our revenue represented more than 200 million PLN, which went down year on year by 19 million PLN. However, EBITDA in the fertilizer segment in Q1 stood at 40 million PLN, going down year on year by 13 million PLN, of which 9 million PLN was related to higher prices of gas and 4 million PLN were due to higher prices of other feedstocks, such as electricity, coal, pulp, powder, and the fact that we did not manage to reach assumed margins on certain product sales. However, in terms of our oxo alcohol segment, our revenue went up considerably to 241 million PLN in Q1 2018, which represents a very positive trends and allowed us to offset the lower performance of our fertilizer segment. Our EBITDA for oxo alcohols went up as well, which was owing to both higher prices of products in that particular segment and also higher volumes. Moving on to sales volumes, in the fertilizer segments, we represented a quarter-to-quarter, a year-on-year decline. However, I can still claim that our situation in this particular area is still safe, despite very challenging market reality. However, in terms of our oxo alcohols, we have noticed a major progress and positive trends both year-on-year and quarter-to-quarter, moving on from the beginning of the year up until Q1 18. We need to remember that higher production in 2017 versus 2016 was related to the launch of new production. In terms of the geographical breakdown, obviously sales in Poland represent the lion's share of our sales structure. We sold the rest in terms of fertilizers to the European Union only, whereas for oxo alcohols the situation is reversed. Most of our oxo alcohol sales are focused on the European Union, with only a certain part sold in Poland. The last slide presents our financial strength and financial ratios. These are on a very stable level, They reported a slight decline, which was mainly due to an increase in our costs on overheads and operating costs. This was reflected mainly in the EBITDA margin, return on capital employed, and return on equity. However, our liquidity ratios went up, especially in terms of our current ratio, which went up slightly. In terms of our debt ratio, our total debt went up, and the net debt went up from 126 to 195, which was due to intensive investment outlays and also additional tranches of our intra-group loans and also cash pooling loans. These were the factors that increase our net debt, and the most capital-intensive projects included the launch of the new power plant, so combined heater power plant, which was brought on stream in Q1 and represented a large portion of those figures. In terms of our financing structure, we had a almost 50 to 50% breakdown between overdrafts and multipurpose credit facilities and corporate loans. Our financing structure is in line with the consolidation efforts of the entire group, which means that our corporate loans our corporate loans represent nearly 95%. Thank you very much, and thank you for participating in our conference here in this room, and also thank you to all the webcast viewers who were watching and listening to us live over the internet. Thank you.